Hello, and welcome to our Dream Wonders podcast, another episode. And today I have with me John Rogers, whose superpower is turning blue sky ideas into reality. Quite fitting for the Dream Wonders title of our podcast. So I think this kind of superpower, John, which I praise myself for as well, but I do not know. I do not know if I manage it all the time. Is kind of connected to what I understand by foresight. And you are an exceptional person. I have to say, I've been smitten since I first heard you say a few words, and we're going to talk about that a bit later. But welcome to the podcast, John.
Mihaela, it is a delight to be here. It's so great to see you, and I'm incredibly grateful to be invited on.
And you have no idea how grateful I am to have you here and how excited I am to have this conversation with you. You know, you live in different worlds and have this unique talent to bring them together and find the unifying factor, if I may. So you have held a variety of senior positions at the local, state, and federal government level, including various positions as Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense at the Pentagon, and also led a consulting enterprise serving the U.S. government that has actually focused on the nexus of the national security community and Hollywood entertainment community for over 20 years. So I'm like, it's puzzling for me, because not in a million years would I ever put them together. Hollywood and national security. I'm like, what? So my first question to you, and also, of course, I'm gonna talk a bit more about your background as we delve into explaining these mysteries about your work and how you look at the world. So what does national security have in common with Hollywood? Let's start with this one.
Yeah, so it's a great question. And on the surface, I think people can sometimes snicker at the question, snicker at the answer. But if you think about it, there's a bunch of things that Hollywood relates to the national security community with. And by the way, that history begins back in World War II in earnest. There was a lot of collaboration, a lot of cooperation with Hollywood and the Department of Defense. Think of all the videos, the movies of the updates that you'd see, that people would see in theaters of what's going on in World War II. Fast forward. I was working with an entity called the Institute for Creative Technologies, which is part of the University of Southern California. And the ICT's mission was to bring different components of research to the Department of Defense. So think graphics, think sound, think special effects, but really think about storytelling, because it is the narrative that Hollywood does better than anybody else. After 9/11, there was
Of course.
some
that is like a Hollywood scenario anyway.
Yeah,
And
that's
also
right.
I have to say also, but and of course kind of that ties in with the narrative. I don't want to interrupt your flow, but I'd like you to explain a bit why would the Department of Defense need a narrative? And like really from Hollywood. I think, your example is kind of clear with the 9/11. Is it for them for inspiration, for future? Okay.
Slightly, but let me finish the one, then I'll go to the other quickly. So on what DoD needs for the Department of Defense is extra. They need help training people. They need help with mission rehearsal. They need help putting warfighters in simulations that seem like they are real. And Hollywood can help do that, and through all of those means. With 9/11, the 9/11 Commission report cited lack of imagination as one of the criticisms of the intelligence community around around what occurred. I mean, if you think about it, who would think about flying airplanes into buildings? Well, creatives did. Hollywood would. Tom Clancy wrote a book, Sum of All Fears, a few years before that, whereby terrorists flew a plane into the Capitol. And so the intelligence community writ large, the national security community writ large, decided that it needed to infuse that creativity into their training and into their processes so that they could help those analysts, they could help those people think about what's next, think more creatively. It's not that they weren't creative, it's that perhaps they just weren't thinking with as broad a lens as they could, to borrow a Hollywood metaphor.
Yes, and this reminds me of the cause of all our problems is a failure of the imagination. Of course, it's not my idea. This is something which someone much smarter than me said. So I totally understand the narrative, and I believe that this is what actually inspired you also to write your book, The Renaissance Campaign. So I'd like to talk about that a bit. And your book was published in 2019 as an exploration of deep applied creativity and the challenge of turning blue sky ideas into reality, which I already mentioned about you. So I've worked with futurists, paradoxically, in the past. And I live in the future. I can say I live in the future and co-created from there, with many luminaries who live in the present with us. And in that co-creation space, it really feels like we can turn blue sky ideas into reality. So John, we met at one such exercise. So we met first time at Bretton Woods 75, which was actually held 75 years from the Bretton Woods Accord. And this was a monumental moment. First of all, for myself and all the people who were there, but in that context, for me, the monumental moment of that event was meeting you. And I recall watching your keynote from the last row of a room packed with enthusiasts and avid game changers that were actually all mesmerized by the novel horizons that you are opening for us. So your keynote was titled The Power of Perspective. And it's a summary of the essential lessons from your book. So I'd like you, if you can also share with our listeners those essential lessons, maybe not all of them, but the most essential of the essential lessons from your book, and I invite them to read it.
Well, first of all, you are an amazing futurist, is the first thing I'd say. Second thing I'd say is Bretton Woods 75 was an amazing experience and just a fantastic conference. But to your question, my contention is that problem sets are more complex than they've ever been. And as a result of that, we need diversity of thought, and we need a lot of people around the table working through solutions. We're trained and we're educated in verticals. And we're not trained to think in horizontals. Generalist, I'm a generalist, or horizontalist. And my expertise, my superpower, if you will, isn't to come up with that brilliant insight that no doubt you would have and others on some of these things, as much as it is to bring people together who can take on these challenges from different perspectives. My keynote was, we're all a prisoner of our own perspective, and we all suffer from rigidity of thought. And the way to break through that prison, the way to break out of that prison, is through that diversity of thought. And so that's really the essence of that part of the book. The second part of the book is to bring the ideas to life. And the way you do that is, my contention is, life is a campaign. It's actually a series of millions of campaigns that we don't call campaigns. But they all have the same common architecture. And if we think about it in terms of that architecture, it makes our ability to get things done that much easier. So a good campaign, you have an objective in mind, you map the process, you understand the context of which you're living, which the campaign exists, then you start to put together your strategies, then you put together the tactics for those strategies, and then you execute. And you do that every day. You did it, you and I did it when we got on this podcast. We did it when we go to the grocery store. And we do it when we're really trying to solve big, hard problems. We just don't view it that way. But if you view it that way, then you can put it into a form that is really accessible for people.
Amazing. Really amazing. And yeah, so I mean, reading your book is definitely going to open new perspectives on how to look at life and actually how to also tackle the hard problems in the world, which of course we're going to talk about that a bit later. So, we met again more recently since COVID struck and stuck us inside our homes. We found each other at the Eskoh community, where you are a precious mentor along with other luminaries like Charles Eisenstein, leading us towards the light, as I call it. So, to many of my friends and scientists, Eskoh and their approach can seem a bit too voodoo. But I wanted to make a parenthesis here and speak about this a bit. At least lately, what also Dr. Ben Goertzel, who is the founder of SingularityNet, where this Mindplex podcast actually resides, he calls this a consciousness explosion. So it is a movement which refers to the powerful convergence actually of this spiritual awakening, if I may use such words on our podcast, of humanity, which is also merging with the latest scientific discoveries. Like, for example, Professor Donald Hoffman from the University of California, in his cognitive science research, he found that he proved that we live in a simulation, that we have a headset, and what we see is actually not real, which was confirmed by the latest Nobel Prize, which was last year given to discoveries in quantum mechanics that actually found that was also the same, that reality is not local, so it's not actually what we see, and it is much more to it. And this was summed up in a very nice book, which I think I have somewhere here, I should find it, which is called The One, How an Ancient, yes, I have it here. So it is this book, The One, How an Ancient Idea Holds the Future of Physics, and it is written by a particle physicist, like a professor of quantum physics. It actually not only explains the findings of these Nobel laureates that actually applied the entanglement equation to the whole universe, and they concluded that we are really all entangled. And so we are indeed all one. so the consciousness explosion, together with these scientific discoveries and this kind of spiritual awakening, are merging now. And it's really an explosion. So I just wanted to ask you, why you joined Eskoh and this movement, and how do you see this movement? Is it really a voodoo? Is it a consciousness explosion? What drove you towards them?
Well, you did. Is the short answer to the question. I was interested. I'm not your typical Eskoh participant, and I love Eskoh.
Exactly. That's why it's paradoxical, all what you do, of course.
My background is not what you would immediately think of, but I've been very involved and remain very involved with Eskoh since you told me 5 years ago that I should meet these people, and thank you for that. So from my vantage point, I think a couple things. One, my role, as much as anything else, is a bridge. a bridge to the future and the bridge to the present. And that's partly how I see myself in my role, helping both sides, quote unquote, translate. And with the founders of LaCille, we don't spend a great deal of time talking about spirituality and quantum physics, although we have. And I'm really looking forward to reading the one. Thank you for that book recommendation. And I try not to be a prisoner of my perspective, so I try to really read and think broadly on these things. But what they talk about is primordial wisdom, and that there's certain wisdoms. It's beyond indigenous wisdoms. It's wisdoms that are in our DNA, that really are who we are. That we need to put forth because of their common sense elements in a world gone a little bit mad. At the same time that we need primordial wisdom, and we need the thinking of the elders, and even the word elders versus elderly, the bias of those two, elders being one of a positive and elderly typically connoting negative. At the same time we do that, we have to be thinking about what are the best practices, the best of science, the best of technology, the best of academia, and thinking around problem sets. And the real key that I spend a lot of time with LaCille on is blending the two. How do we take the best of primordial wisdom? Because not all elderly wisdom is good. Some of it was just ignorant. It wasn't wisdom. It was just wrong. The earth is not flat. And some of it is brilliant and insightful. They knew that the trees were connected long before we discovered the network of tree connectivity underground, and the mitochondrial, interaction underneath within soil. Mycelium, yeah. And you say thank you. And so they knew that, they just didn't know that. And the technology and science have taught us that. So how do we blend those two? And then how do we then take that and make it accessible for corporations, for entrepreneurs, for governments, for non-governmental organizations to tap into, so that they are incorporating really fundamental things like a balance with nature and humanity into their actions. It's been my relationship with LaCille, and for the listeners out there, it was Mihaela who said, you should meet these guys, you should talk to these guys, because I was really interested, and my business was about holistic thinking. My holistic thinking was cognitive in nature. I live in my head, and yet theirs was so much more than that, and is so much more than that. And Bretton Woods, parenthetically, was so much more than that. So all of these things have really expanded my perspective, and it's been a wonderful journey.
Yes, and we are kind of journeying in the world as well into such practices more and more. So we have wisdom practices, if I may, like for example meditation and so on and so forth. LaCille, actually, they also produced this movie, The 12, when they showed how they brought together tribe leaders from around the world and how their wisdom actually converged. And they brought them to the United Nations to help with the Sustainable Development Goals and everything else. So it is a sort of a movement happening around the world, and this is a movement, as you mentioned, which it's very important to involve the corporations, the leaders, the governments, and your work is so important there, because that's where we have to actually move the needle and change the game. I mean, the sustainability narrative, if it employs their methods, I do not know if we're going to succeed to survive in the short time. Like, for example, how Amazon has converted a genuine organics movement, the Whole Foods, into an order fulfillment business, where now everyone's so busy when you go there and you don't have this feeling of, you are connected to those who are actually, to the producers and so on and so forth, that you can still find in the markets. And, as a deep tech person, I'm very preoccupied with this. And I believe, of course, that's my bias, that we can use technology to help us stay on course. And we are here, yes, at Singularity Net, at the Singularity Net Community Podcast. So my question is now, I'd like to move a bit into our passion with technology and especially in particular artificial intelligence, and wanted to ask you, do you think that we will succeed to conquer, let's say, this, or maybe not to conquer. Conquer is the old way of thinking. Yes, will we succeed in our journey towards a better humanity, or now with the singularity being just ready to be deployed? Who knows by who? By well-intended actors or by bad actors? Will we find our peril very soon? So do you see the singularity, like, the conversation around the world now? Do you see it as an existential threat to humanity? Maybe your work with the Department of Defense, maybe you thought about that as well, but I'm sure you used other technologies, or in your thinking exercises like nukes and so on and so forth. So what would be your perspective about this next
You've asked many great thought-provoking questions there. Let me start.
Unpack. Yes.
Let me unpack. Let me start with the fact that I think that we face three existential threats for humanity. The first we've all grown up with and faced virtually all of humankind's lifetime, which is nuclear weapons, our current lifetime. That's an existential threat. And the first real existential threat to be able to wipe out the human race. That, of course, was, just a brutal technology, was anything but sentient. It was dumb, in that it was only by man, for man, under the way that it was developed at the time to deploy or not to deploy. And the only two times it's ever been used in war were based upon decisions of humans. The second, and so there's some control, if you will, or has been. We'll put AI aside for a second on that. The second is climate change, and we're coming off of the hottest week, the hottest month in the history of the world. We had a heat index of 152 degrees this week in the Persian Gulf. The human body starts to shut down about 135 degrees with regularity. By the way, wonderful book, Ministry of the Future, which is a science fiction book, which opens with kind of the scene. It was written a few years ago. It was on Obama's best list, and with a comment that somebody who's reading it now said to me recently is a few years ago this was science fiction. Today it feels like reality and current events, or it could be. And the third potential existential threat, I say potential because it's not one, but it could be one, is AI, and where AI goes. And AI is we're in the middle of the Colin Ridge dilemma. And the Colin Ridge dilemma, as you will recall, is the dilemma that you don't know what a technology is going to do and how the public is going to interact with it until it's deployed. And by then it's too late for policymakers to put proper constraints around it because the technology is deployed. So thus the dilemma, and one just needs to think about social media and all of the impacts of social media, but there's, tons of examples around that. So we don't know where AI is going to go. What we do know, and what I think most people are confident of, and experts such as yourself, is, when asked the question, is it an existential threat, or can it do great good for humanity and cure cancer? The answer is yes. It is an existential threat and can do great good for humanity. And the key is how do we navigate it? And it just so happens that because of global geopolitical dynamics, that challenge is exponentially harder. So let's say that the United States and Western Europe pick it, decide to put a series of regulations around what the AI will do and won't do. That doesn't mean that there's not other nefarious individual and nation state actors who will be looking at this differently, and that their AI may not, their AI may go on to do great harm. And so that's part of the problem that the policymakers are grappling with right now. So
what I wanted to say in regard to, yes, the technology, we will only know its effect after it's deployed. But now, because of the same technology, which is artificial intelligence and the modeling, which enables modeling things like even the universe, right, and complex systems, we can actually anticipate the effect of a technology before it is applied, and even, of course, the effect of a policy before it is applied, and so on and so forth. So recently, the complex systems scientist Peter Turchin, maybe you know him, he's amazing. He wrote a new book which is called, of course, End Times, because everybody is thinking about the end and the collapse of society. So where he actually refers to artificial intelligence among many others. So that the subtitle is something like Elites, Super Elites, and the Collapse and Societal Collapse. And so he models society and also the effect of technology on society, including artificial intelligence. And he said, we will only know, and we can already know from models, yes, how to deploy artificial intelligence. So he can craft a course on actually how to do that. So there may be a hope there, that artificial intelligence itself will help. But the question is, for me, because you have all this experience at the Pentagon and maybe you have some, insider perspective, could you give us an idea if the governments are, I don't know if I should use this word, but are competent enough to manage the right decisions regarding policies for such powerful technology development? So just knowing that people like you are working there gives me a lot of hopes. So first of all, just let me say that. And but these are complex matters, yes. As you know, of course, especially when you take into consideration balancing the race with China, Russia, and now if we stop or if we develop more constrained and the others are developing more less constrained, what are we going to do? So I want your take on all of this, including your opinion about the competence.
And yet again, it's another great question. And you will get used to me saying, well, yes and no. Is government, are they up to the task? There's some really bright minds working on this period. The challenge, I'll start with there's numerous challenges, but systems, institutions, the challenges that institutions have, kind of across the spectrum right now, is institutions, by the nature of their size and scope, frequently operate at an analog pace, which is why society gets so frustrated with institutions, because we're all operating under a digital, not a speed of light space. And so that's one of the challenges that government has with with technology. I'm going to give you one more specific kind of example, then I'm going to take the lens out a little bit to your question. The specific example in the national security space has to do with procurement. I have a good friend who developed an AI technology that was able to monitor the Chinese balloon and track it. And the way that the AI was able to do it was to pull out images from satellite images, narrow those satellite images so they weren't looking at millions and billions of pixels, but thousands of pixels. And they tracked it before anybody else tracked it using an AI technology. It's a great example of AI graphics technology. The problem that he has is on the procurement cycle, there's no requirement for that technology today. And so, that Pentagon buyer isn't buying that technology. And by the time that requirement is written to buy that technology, we're going to be way beyond that, and they'll be developing something new for down the road. So there's a mechanical problem there, if you will, a logistical mechanical problem.
Yes, our processes don't keep up with the pace of technology.
The institutions are too slow for where we are. But now let's take a look at the essence of your question in terms of government. I mean, I'd say that the Biden administration, and this is not, I can criticize any administration ever in the history of administration. So, and find compliments. They're taking this very, very seriously. The president gets, by all accounts, really regular briefings on this. He's asking for AI demonstrations with regularity. The White House released within this past week the proposed AI Bill of Rights. They're talking about creating 7 new institutes at the National Science Foundation around AI. There's no question in my mind that this administration is taking this really very seriously. And I think that Congress is too, but I think it's harder. For reasons that are evident to any of your listeners who pay any attention at all to what happens in Washington, that's harder. It's harder because of biases that both parties have, in this case, a regulation versus an anti-regulation ethos. AI is, by all accounts, an industry that absolutely needs regulation. And many members of the AI community articulate that. Now to the main component of your question, are we up for it? I don't know, because it moves so fast. We have this political dysfunction here in the United States, and even if we're able to solve it, the United States is one of 200 nations, whatever we are now, and so you got a whole bunch of other nations, of which maybe 20 of them have different robust AI programs, or 10 have really robust AI programs. And every one of those nation states and every one of those companies, in a perfect world, would all fall under the same set of global recommendations. The only global authority that we have is the United Nations, and the United Nations has no authority. And so it's a real challenge.
Yes, it is a big problem. And to what you mentioned about the current administration, just today I read that Meta and the likes, the big companies, have actually committed, at the request of the administration and the White House, they have committed to develop security stoppers. That's how it's kind of, they phrased it, for artificial intelligence. And this again ties into the race, right? For me, from my perspective as a scientist, because I mean, at SingularityNet, we are gear to develop the artificial general intelligence, to deploy the singularity as soon as possible, and actually all this to the benefit of humanity. So beneficial, for the beneficence attribute is, that's how we build artificial intelligence, with that in mind. So the question is now, if we're going to stop in the US and in general in the West, because of course Europe is always ahead of us with regulation, and China and Russia are not going to do that, where will we end up? And I don't know, I mean, if you cannot address this, that's fine. but I would like to know from someone who is an expert in national security, what will happen if they deploy it before us?
Yeah, I mean,
and we are stopped. We're not allowed.
It is on the minds of virtually every senior policymaker in the Pentagon. They recognize the China threat. They recognize the complexity of the Chinese relationship. I don't want to characterize it as just a threat. It's it is a complex relationship, including threat. But they recognize that if the Chinese, who have invested heavily in AI, are ahead of us in AI, that it puts us in a weakened position. And one of the reasons that America and the West and democracy and all of the things that flow of that, with all of the flaws, because none of it's perfect, guys, that come out of that, has been able to maintain the programs and the initiatives that I know you care about, is because of that balance of power. And so my real thinking is that there will be, you could see a bifurcated dynamic whereby there is a dynamic, and I don't know this, by the way, there's a dynamic of how AI and regulations of how AI will interact with the public and B2B. And then there's an internal DoD, national security AI component, similar to a nuclear program, that should they do whatever, that we're in a position to counter that. I have no knowledge of that, but it seems to me that makes a lot of, from a national security perspective, I could certainly envision that happening.
And let me give you another perspective, which is a scientist perspective. So, and I have been directly involved in that. So I have been about 10 years ago in China with the People-to-People Citizen Ambassador Program delegation. This is a program which was started by President Dwight Eisenhower. And actually it aimed at collaboration between these dispersed powers in the world. So we went with Professor Katya Sikara from the Carnegie Mellon University, who is a huge power in artificial intelligence, and she always, led the way. And at the time, yes, I represented Canada, so I held the Canada Research Chair in e-society, and there were people represented almost every country in the world. So one or more people from every country in the world. And that was an amazing, we were there for 3 weeks visiting universities, and including the Chinese Academy of Science, and forging collaborations with other scientists from, obviously, yes, from those countries. And I believe that what you mentioned in the beginning of your answer, that actually, yes, it's not only a threat, and not regarding it as a threat, but regarding it as a collaboration, and that we are all in this, and that we all have a mission to develop it for the people, yes, people to people, and for us, and in what world do we want our children to live? So I think that is a way, and that gave me a lot of hope. So with this, I wanted, to if you want to say something to this, that's fine. If not, I can move to one other related question.
Just really quickly, it goes back to Lucille, and I remember one of the elders when we were in Barcelona saying, we all share the air.
Yes, exactly. The sun, the air, exactly.
We all share the air.
And this,
We all share the
and we are
water.
one. Yes.
We all are standing on the same earth. Yeah. So please, I digress. But I'm
No,
with
no,
you.
because that's exactly the same. I mean, and I remember also another wisdom which said that actually we did not inherit the earth from our ancestors. We have borrowed it from our children. So that's very similar. Yeah. So what world do we want to live for them? What are we doing with it?
Yeah. To say nothing of how much the world has changed in the past several hundred years, which has been beyond, if
And
you're
I still believe
beyond
that it's gonna
comprehension.
be people to people, and this, at Singularity Net, this is what we do. We are a platform, on an open source platform, in which the best scientists in the world come together with very innovative solutions and with algorithms that can even, merge with each other into more complex solutions, and then everybody is rewarded according to their contributions, and we are all,
It's lovely.
like geared toward beneficial artificial intelligence. So in this context, I wanted to ask you, what is AI ethics? I mean, everybody's talking about AI ethics, and some, of course, especially the big companies. I mean, there's so much similarity with sustainability, ESG talk, and of course a lot of greenwashing there, a lot of boxes checking, also on the AI ethics side now, and everybody's starting to design these boxes. Okay, we're compliant. But compliance is one, and beneficence is a bit different. And I think the AI ethics is more towards beneficence. I mean, are we building a better world for the future, or we just don't do harm? So I just wanted in this context to know, what is to you AI ethics?
To me, I go back to Asimov and the three laws of robotics. Starting with "Thou shalt do no harm to humans." I mean, I think that those are and there's a bunch of problems. I mean, people say let's adopt the three laws. There's a bunch of challenges with that to do that, which are legitimate, and I don't want to discount them here or debate them. But at the heart of it, to me, is that. At the heart of it, to me, is to do no harm, and to and so it stems from there. Now, one can argue that data privacy or discrimination or different kind of explanations are components of that, of doing harm. But to me, there are subgroups to the master list of making sure that we're not harming the human race. And it's further out, that AI doesn't dominate the humans.
Wonderful, wonderful, and and that is our starting point. And we want to go further. We want to have AI co-create with humans things which we cannot imagine. Speaking of living in the future and blue sky ideas, I mean, even those blue sky ideas to help AI to help us with new ideas which would never come without this co-creation. And then
absolutely, there's some real benefit of AI. I mean, with the conversation and I don't want to be seen as anti-AI. I'm not, because I think that AI can really help solve some really significant problems for that we're facing here, and problems that humans in and of themselves haven't been able to solve. But it is to say we just have to make sure that we're doing that smartly and wisely. I mean, and to your point of real co-collaboration, getting out there a little bit more, think about Kurzweil and transhumanism. When it was defined slightly differently, but he was talking about a singularity, and he was talking about.
Yes, he wrote many books about that, of course.
Absolutely, The Age of Spiritual Machines, great book, right? And we in my children's life and my grandchildren's life, I can absolutely see that come about.
So this also leads me to another question for you, and that is the question of ownership. I mean, And where would it be better? Yes, for this powerful technology to reside. Should it reside with big tech, with the government, or with the people? That's why we at SingularityNet and Ben, which is the militant for beneficence in the development of the singularity, we are building this platform as an open source where everybody, it belongs to everybody. We can use the algorithms, and we can also develop and post algorithms and so on and so forth. And of course, we are taking care about the do not harm, and this is a big issue also for us, and how we design the platform to design it with those stoppers in mind. But what is your take here? Do you think we are safer, speaking of national security or security in general, are we safer if this powerful technology is in the hands of big tech and government and will continue to be developed by them, or with the people?
Yeah, I don't know is the short answer to your question. You may prefer a different answer.
No, we don't know either. That's why I'm asking.
I mean, I think that no matter what, if it's with the people, which resonates with me, on the one hand, there has to be a mechanism in place so that it's not you, but the person six links away is still following the guidelines, the rules, the ethics, the around that, and isn't using it for nefarious purposes. We've all grown for good reason. We've all grown skeptical of government, and we've all grown skeptical of big business.
Yes.
Because
and I have this book from Douglas Rushkoff, which he actually gave it to us, if you remember, at the Bretton Woods 75, throwing rocks at the Google bus.
I think I'd make one pitch for the government, given the fact that government can be a mess. And but here's the problem with business, any business, small business or large business. At the end of the day, the business is about the economics. The business is about making sure, and because they have a requirement. They have a requirement to sell. Because if they don't sell, they don't generate money. And if they don't generate money, they can't continue to fund whatever they fund, including hiring the people who are good people who are doing the things. But they have that requirement. Government has, or NGOs, have no such requirement. They can just do the right thing because it's the right thing. Now, one can argue that government doesn't always do that, but I will say this as a point of factual history. And again, I'm not making the argument, I'm making an illustrative point. For 75 years, the government has controlled nuclear weapons, and we haven't used them. And they haven't been used against us.
That was good.
And so...
it worked. Okay.
What's that?
It worked.
Yeah, that's right. So given the existential nature of this, my bias is probably over there because of just hearing myself speak what I first said. No private interest can survive without revenue. And they have to generate that revenue. So even if they're not greed-based, and many are doing really good things because they want to do good things, they still have to survive. And the only way they survive in a capitalistic society is by selling something.
Totally. And so what can I say is, we also do not know about the people, right? I mean, who are the people who are going to use the algorithms and for what? So that's another thing which, of course, for us at SingularityNet, which is an open platform, where for now, only good people are there, and we really have a big belief that it will attract only good people. But how do we guarantee that this?
How are you going to guarantee it if somebody with evil intent disguises
on the platform,
as a really good person, gets into that platform, and because you're good people, you're not thinking as darkly as others may around them. Yeah.
And we are, summoning the scientific community in two big events this coming year, like in 2024. One is the Beneficial Artificial General Intelligence Forum, where I would like to invite you, of course. And also the Artificial General Intelligence Scientific Conference, which we are planning to organize together with MIT this year, because given the importance of the topic, and with the computer science and artificial intelligence department, we are in discussions right now.
That's
But
awesome.
I'd like to move on to one more question, and because we already can observe some trends with regard to artificial intelligence, and that is. For example, in the developing world, artificial intelligence, I mean, there was an article in The Atlantic saying that, actually inequality is starting to disappear in the developing world. They have done crunched some numbers. But our observations are that this is happening because actually many more white-collar jobs, coding, law, and other jobs are being replaced by artificial intelligence. And actually those people are losing their jobs, and they are leveled with more poor people. So it's actually, yes, inequality may disappear, but it goes to the bottom versus elevating the others. And so I'm coming to this issue of life, work, and education, yes, in the age of AI, which is another amazing book. My question is, what do you think the effect of artificial intelligence, and especially when we will get to the human level intelligence? For now, ChatGPT 4 is really writing amazing book forwards. I can tell you, if I am to write a forward for a book, I'm going to ask ChatGPT to do it for me, and maybe tweak a bit, a few things. So it's gonna become much better. And the question is, what's gonna be the impact? Usually the forecast on that is pretty negative, and I recommend this book by Neil Ferguson called Doom. This is a very interesting take when he discusses also this topic. But what is your take on the future of work in an age of human level artificial general intelligence?
Yeah, I think there's the potential for massive disruption. I mean, I think that, as you may or may not know, at one point in time I was running the largest privately held transportation company in the U.S., buses and fixed route and paratransit, and so I really dove deep.
You have first-hand experience, yes.
Well, I dove deep into the transportation space and autonomous vehicles, and I want to say that 1 out of every 9 jobs, I'm pretty close on that number. I can't remember if it's 1.9 or 1.11, but it's way up there, is a transportation related job. If you have autonomous vehicles which are AI based, sensor AI based, the disruption there is enormous. And that then leads to a continued risk for destabilization within the workforce. One of the reasons that we are where we are politically in this country is that people are angry. They're angry or they're envious, and it's the left and the right. And there's anger, there's fear on both sides of the equation. We're going to add to that. And so if we displace these workers, we may cure cancer, but we may decrease pollution exponentially, but we could add to that, which is to say that we need to be really mindful of the second order effects, second order consequences here, and third, and be really thoughtful about devising programs around that, so that we're not just displacing that worker, we're displacing and then putting that worker in a new position. And it's not just education. It's got to be more than just education. Education and training are kind of the buzzword panaceas. That's not the panacea. This is, from my vantage point, one more thing. Almost all of us, we did a series of panels. Remember my panels, we bring people together to work on, different hard challenges. We asked the question, what does the economy look like? What does national security look like? What does democracy look like? What does public health look like? This is several years ago, at the beginning of COVID, in the post-COVID world. And one of the interesting findings for all of these experts and all these disparate places, beyond the comment that I already made of institutions moving too slowly, is what we really face in this country, and I would argue this world, are critical thinking skills. And people don't know what to believe anymore, so they believe it's ever convenient to them and all those things. And we really need to make sure that as we go through this change, because that change is by and large going to happen, as we go through this change, that somebody, some organization, some body is thinking of what those impacts are and what we can really do societally using all of the tools at our disposal to make sure that those people land well and are not just crushed as a result of this.
And artificial intelligence, I would say, plays a double sword role here. I mean, with critical thinking, because it can be used to build fake profiles, fake people. It can be used to mislead. It can be used as a weapon for misinformation and disinformation, but it can be also used to combat that, antidote to misinformation, disinformation. And actually, there is a very interesting project that is a spin out of Berkeley, in which we are getting involved as we speak on using artificial intelligence for combating misinformation and disinformation and enabling people with critical thinking skills, which is also a mission of the Consilience Project, in which I'm involved.
But to your point, that's great. But to your point, AI really has to be part of the solution of helping us think through that, right? So AI has an important role in helping us think through those policy implications and really understand them, and then formulating strategies and tactics to help counter that. Because here's what we don't need any more of is divisiveness. We need to be bringing people together for the sake of the planet, for the sake of the world, for the sake of humanity, versus ripping us apart. I can't wait to read it. I'm done here. I'm ordering it.
I think if everybody would read this book, we would live in a peaceful world. I'm just telling you, because it's so clearly written, and at least for me as a scientist, it makes such an amazing and kind of obvious case that why are we fighting each other when actually this is not real.
Well, and read *Sapiens*, which helps remind us how we got here in the first place. Yes. Right? We have to understand that history and that context to know where we're going.
Totally. So now that I feel at least that we are embarking on a more positive feedback, let's say, on the relationship between AI and human level AI and humanity in general. My question to you is, what do you think? Do you believe is it possible to go this one step further and have this human level AI help us transcend our limitations? You are talking about transhumanism a bit, but do you think that's possible? Like, for example, with Neuralink, to upgrade and download and upload knowledge in our brains, or expand our capacity, the brain's capacity, as well as, for example, biological, yes, like cyborgs, right? Especially in the army. Speaking of defense, yeah, they are experimenting with those kind of technologies to enhance the physical capacity of humans. So, what is your take on that? Do you think that we can enhance ourselves as a species with the help of the AI, and that the singularity may actually become a coexistence between us and this superpower that is coming upon us, which will help us?
You probably got used to me saying yes and no, but in this case, the answer is yes.
Wow. Wow. I love it.
It absolutely can, and I think it will. I mean, let's remember here, the Earth has been around roughly 5 billion years. Homo sapiens have been around 200,000 or 300,000 years. If you were to take that into a 24-hour day, that's 5.7 seconds. If you were to take our lives, it's 2,000th of a second. So we humans, we all of us view life. We are our own main characters in our movie called Life, and yet evolution and change are constants, and we as Homo sapiens, we as human beings, are really extraordinarily limited by our senses. We're limited in our sense of sight. We're limited in our sense of sound. We're limited in the fact that we are stuck with small exceptions on the Earth versus on the water or in the air. We're limited in range and scope, and we're also no doubt limited in intellect. We can't grasp some things. If you're the Neil deGrasse said, if you were to take a dime and extend it out into the heavens and look all the way through the heavens through that dime, you'd hit 100 billion stars just in that dime. I mean, we can't grasp it. AI has the ability to help us grasp these things, to help us learn things that are unimaginable. The real key in my mind's eye is to do that to enhance humans, Homo sapiens, maybe to the next version of whatever we become, versus to destroy us. And, that's the trick. But can we? And do I think it's going to happen? I do. I think transhumanism is already, again, as Kurzweil defines it, is already occurring at some levels. But, but it's only going to accelerate. And with the right regulations and with the right authorities behind it, I think it could be a great next step in the evolution of humanity.
And so you just mentioned, so thank you so much for this picture. I mean, I'm like, I'd like to end the discussion here because I feel like floating on this positive wave. You mentioned in this word regulation, yes, which I really don't like a lot as a scientist. But I want to say, yes, so I think an antidote to constraints, regulation, and whatever, we can. Speaking of Le Ciel and such missions of enlightening the individual and the world, I think we can steer society and technological development for good. But I just want to ask also your opinion, because obviously you are involved in the Le Ciel movement. So I was thinking, and actually this is not only me, but our founder, Dr. Ben Goertzel, is involved in the development of some meditation apps. And his intent is to give these apps to developers to use the meditation tools. And his belief is that if we have a developer community on our platform that is actually enlightened and uses meditation and gets more and more in touch with themselves and with the others, and remembers that actually, the future, what are we building for, and why are we here? And then he thinks that this could make a real difference in the nature of artificial intelligence that gets developed, and that intrinsically we would remember that we have goodness in our DNA. My question is, what do you think about this? Is it a crazy idea? Or
No, it reminds me of Lawrence Ford, known as the Shaman of Wall Street, and his contention that inner peace creates world peace. And I think that, and there's good science behind meditation. We've seen into the brain that meditation has real impact. So I'm all for that. I think it's great. I don't, and it may be necessary, but it may not be sufficient, is what I would say. And I really like the idea. I fully embrace it because I think that it is the coders, it is the designers of the AI who, are at the nexus of this. And so anything we can do to help that community is great. I don't know, the national security side of me doesn't worry about them. Don't worry about you. Don't worry about, worries about the bad guys, the greed, whether they're bad because of greed, whether they're bad because of power, whether they're bad because of ignorance, and my term bad. Those are the people that keep the national security community up at night, and they should. And those are the people that kind of approach probably would not work for.
And I'm thinking, that my dream, and this is a dream now, and a blue sky idea, that we can make the need for national security obsolete if we best seed a self-organizing social process in which people from different cultures and perspectives rethink their identities and purposes. And maybe AI can help us do that. Or rethink our world views in the light of this ongoing scientific development and their power.
Yeah,
and
I completely agree.
Such a shift in awareness can seed a global self-organizing process in the end, and ultimately with the help of AI. And we see our platform as this kind of, catalyst in which people can explore the potential implications of different AI architectures and the minds they will lead to. Will they be positive minds, negative minds, in terms of the benefit of society as a whole?
Well, perhaps that's the best place to leave this conversation, because I love that idea, and I'd be all for that.
Okay, and you already said that you kind of have a feeling that this would be possible. You are the master of making blue sky ideas into reality.
I'd love to help it come about. And I love you, and it was just wonderful spending time with you today.
Thank you so much, John. And of course, I look forward to co-create with you and with artificial intelligence this amazing future towards which the humanity is racing. Thank you again.
Yeah, thank you.